Welcome to another episode. We have Tom again, one of the special guests of this podcast. And today we're doing something different. We're not talking about one of the interop protocols, not sharing our own bags. We're talking about crypto Twitter's favorites bags, and that's Hyperliquid. Like, I just see Hyperliquid all over my timeline. I just see all the users talking about HyperEVM all the time. So I was like, okay, what's going on in that ecosystem? I need to catch up. So I thought, who in my friend circle actually is a Hyperliquid power user and who would have actually figured out what's going on in HyperEVM. So I reached out to TK. And
Thank you,
lo and
sir.
behold, TK is definitely one of the power users. And TK, you want to explain why and how you got there?
Yeah, and I'll clarify too, right? Because my friends know this too. I wasn't necessarily a power user of Hyperliquid, the exchange, particularly pre airdrop and stuff too. I used it relatively early, but I didn't use it. It was I unfortunately didn't get a stupid moon bag like some people, right? But all of that essentially at least got me looking at a bunch of this. And then from our position at Gas, we want to support all the chains, particularly EVMs. And man, this one's got EVM in the name, right? So yeah, we jumped on that. I had notifications waiting for that one to launch, and we jumped on it right away. I wanted to support it, and I think to date, I don't know. We've processed a lot of transactions on the Hyper EVM. I want to say maybe somewhere 25,000, 30,000, maybe 40. I don't know. So we've done a lot of, and for the most part, it's been relatively okay, relatively smooth. But there's a learning curve to it to some extent, just by nature of it's a specialized EVM, right? It's not actually just a forked Caldera rollup. These guys didn't go in and pay 3K and add gelato roll up. They really customized it to the extent that some things are it gets a little hard. But yeah, so we've played around a lot with it. We've landed a bunch of transactions. We've kind of had to learn how a lot of the inner workings of it happen. A lot with no infrastructure. We were running the Hyperliquid mainnet block explorer for quite some time. Thankfully, the great guys at HyperFi adopted it and took it away from me about a week ago. Not for any bad reason, just I promise you, anyone in the Hyper eco, at some day that will break and you're going to use it as your primary block explorer and you're going to be really mad and you're not going to want me being the guy that tries to fix it. So we got it up and running, right? But yeah, so, and with that, I just use a lot of chains personally. And, I do think actually that the Hyper EVM eco is I don't know where to put it, it's in the top on single hand, 5-3
I mean, by
ecosystems.
TVL, it's already breaking into the top 10. So even by those metrics, and
Sure.
and then it's really popular amongst the users. So as you can already tell, you've intimately known the blockchain and you've built some toolings for it, right? So the purpose of this episode is to actually get a better understanding of what's happening in the Hyper EVM ecosystem from both a builder and a user's perspective.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then wait, so let's start with the basics, right? There are two different chains. So there's Hypercore and Hyper EVM. Let's start with the basics. Can you explain why there are two different things?
Yeah, I mean, so actually, yeah, I didn't really make 3 weeks ago. I was oh, Hypercore. I was calling it Hyper L1 and Hyper EVM. I was calling it the Hyperliquid L1 internally and all our stuff, right? But that's the chain that runs Hyperliquid, the exchange that you trade on, right? Highly performant, highly specialized. I don't know what you go ever look at the block explorer there, right? It's the Mega ETH block explorer. It's arguably useless because everything just moves so fast. So that's Hypercore, and Hypercore is the chain that you will deposit into from Arbitrum, right? And Hyper EVM is an EVM side chain is a really bad word. I'm going to not say it, right? But because it's not a side chain, but it's a chain on the side, right? So
it's an L3. It's like an Arbitrum L3.
It's an EVM chain. It's not like an L2 or an L3 in that it anchors to. I mean, it is in that it anchors to Hypercore, right? But yeah, it's an EVM parallel chain, right? That gives you essentially all of the kind of benefits you would traditionally get with an EVM chain and ecosystem. Compatibility with most of the developer suite and tooling and apps and everything that exists. And it's been highly specialized in a way where it can communicate with Hypercore. And that's kind of the idea here, is that you will be able to, you can build things on Hyper EVM that will communicate and interact with things on Hypercore and assets on Hypercore. And you're seeing this with kind of like I think the kind of primary thing that's used today is like the spot token listings, right? Like permissionless spot token listings. But yeah, they're two entirely separate things. They're very closely related. They can talk. They can like cross execute. They can do a bunch of really cool things together. But yeah, the one that you would trade on when you go to the exchange is Hypercore. And then EVM is the one that you're seeing kind of pop up with all these projects today now and stuff like that. Much more like a regular EVM ecosystem, right?
I mean, Hypercore is the one that users initially use and got the airdrop for. And then, like you said, HyperEVM is the one that's getting anchored by the liquidity and the users on Hypercore. And the apps are kind of benefiting from those network effects, right? And if you look at the Hyperliquid playbook, they've done this before with anchoring with Arbitrum initially to like for their deposits and everything. So do you think that worked in their favor, even though there was like this onboarding friction in a way, but then they did get the liquidity from Arbitrum?
Yeah, actually, I think this is like, you're probably going to look back at this in a couple, at some point in the future, and I think they're going to be one of the few people that somehow pulled that off. It's a really hard thing to do, right? People have been dead in the water by nature of the fact that the liquidity needs to flow through like a one hop.
But then if you actually think about it, this is the L2 playbook where liquidity flew from the Ethereum L1 to the L2. So this is nothing new.
Well, here it needs to go from the Ethereum L1 to the L2 and then to Hypercore, right? And it was just like, that's been like never really worked too well. Like, I mean, you kind of had like, I guess it stayed on Arbitrum, right? I mean, the closest parallel I could really think of is like a GMX, right? A GMX had some good, OI and usage back in the day, but that wasn't, into its own kind of, chained ecosystem after that. But no, there was like a running joke at a point that, Arbitrum was, the purpose of the Arbitrum chain is, don't even think of it as an L2. It's the bridge to Hyperliquid, right? And it's like, it's a joke, but at the same time, it's like kind of not. Like it had some ridiculous amount of all like stable coins and value on the Arbitrum chain, like in its deposit contract. Like it was Arbitrum at a point, like functionally speaking. So yeah, I think you're gonna look back at some point and be like, I don't really know how those guys did it. Like, how did you get like some high double-digit percentage of all stable coins in existence, like on Arbitrum, into your deposit contract? Like what? So that was a wild feat.
I mean, even the onboarding flow, like there was some friction because, like you said, it's not an app on Arbitrum. It's a parallel sidechain execution environment on Arbitrum. So you have to actually deposit your funds into a different contract, right? So as a user, there's some sort of onboarding friction. I'm curious to know if that's still there or has it improved in the past like 6 months, 12 months?
And I don't, so yeah, there's arguably that friction, right? But you can say that's like the same amount of friction that exists with using any app that is natively on Arbitrum too, right? A lot of these had you deposit kind of into, I mean, I guess like think of like DYDX, right? Or some of these, right? Where you like deposit into the system. I don't remember if GMX would have you do this or not, but there's always some like, you never like really just showed up with your money on a chain and like did a direct transaction with the app, right? You kind of always like maybe deposited into, maybe not an escrow, but something. But no, I think this is part of the reason they managed to pull it off. I don't think that friction was ever too significant. For the most part, it was, I mean, you would kind of load up Hyperliquid and it was just like, you would do a deposit contract into like an exchange in your app, right? And then once it's in there, you're doing like signature transactions everywhere, right? So it's like, you're not waiting for confirmations. You're not like worrying about gas fees and all this stuff. It became a much nicer experience once you actually got in. But the onboarding flow was like, a single kind of click and deposit in like you would with a lot of other traditional apps, right? And it's, I mean, when I first used it, for sure, for the first, I don't know, couple weeks I probably used it. I don't think I knew Hypercore like existed. I don't think I knew there was a chain. I thought it was like a GMX or something, right?
I think like crypto has a tendency to kind of overplay the onboarding friction card. Like if you remember Friendtech, right? Like that was a really, really bad onboarding experience, but we went through it because the incentives were there. So even with the Hyperliquid, like nobody complained. But if you think about it, sure, there are multiple steps, but none of the users actually complained about this because there was like a point system. There was a good user experience once you were actually on Hyperliquid. So I don't think it really mattered in their growth story at any stage.
Yeah, it was. I mean, in the early days, I don't remember too many people talking about actually farming it, right? And sure that that grew into being obviously a thing for it, right? I think this was just I think decentralized perpetual future, swaps on highly volatile cryptocurrencies is actually just one of the most desirable products, in the industry, right? And you can build it and you can do it well and you can do it in a way where, you don't have to KYC, or you don't have to like do some roundabout thing, right? Or you don't have to worry about like counterparty risk on some place that maybe doesn't KYC you, right? So I think there was a large desire from, the voices of like, at least in my friend group and people who used it like really heavily, of the people that used it because they were like, this was a trading venue that met my needs better than anyone else, was much louder than the people that were like, I'm only using this because I'm getting points, or, it's not bad, I'm not only using it for it, but I'm here for the points, right? The legitimate side definitely outweighed it, at least in my opinion.
And then they went on to do like this big airdrop. There was a lot of like generational wealth created. All the users are happy, and then they launched the Hyper EVM, right? So that's where we're at today. Hypercore is doing well on its own. Like it's been doing well for the last 18 months, I would say. But then Hyper EVM is the new thing that's popping up and actually giving strong competition to some of the OG chains, right? Like I said earlier, it's number 10, number 11 by TVL. So there's like almost $1 billion in TVL on HyperEVM. And I was going through their docs, right? So we've talked about this before, and I know how you've run some of the infrastructure for HyperEVM because these things don't exist. And while I was preparing for this episode, I went through their docs, and interestingly, like their docs actually say why these toolings do not exist. So it says that HyperEVM is in the alpha stage, and it's because like Hyperliquid has this no insiders policy and like a gradual rollout policy that gives everyone equal access, right? So the trade-off here is that HyperEVM did not launch with some of the same tooling that we're used to seeing on these new launches, right? So their thesis is that they don't want to give anyone a head start. They want to make it a level playing field. But then this changes a lot of things for builders, especially in interop, because like if you're adding support for a new chain as a bridge, you need a lot of this tooling to work to be able to support a new chain with a good user experience, right? And you've experienced this firsthand. So my question to you is that how has this thesis or philosophy of HyperEVM impacted your experience as a developer, as a builder?
Yeah, one, like, I think first off, right, like, I think it probably works. Is it the smoothest way to obviously get where you're trying to go? Like, probably not. Like, definitely not, right? There's probably a lot of, kind of benefits that I'm not aware of approaching this from a project's POV, right? When you kind of think longer and strategically about it. But at first, everyone is just kind of like, huh? And so, yeah, you talk about the infrastructure, right? And this isn't like, I can't deploy a Gnosis safe type of infrastructure. This is like, we don't have a block explorer infrastructure. Like, there's one public RPC, and it's like limited to like 50 requests a second or something, right? And there's 300,000 people trying to use it or whatever. So like, it was like really basic. And so for the first while, it was like quite difficult. And it wasn't quite difficult in that. It was just quite difficult in that. Like, it's the most bare metal, like basic. This is everything you need so that the next block shows up on somebody's
I think
blockchain
at this stage of interop, developers are probably used to having a checklist for a new chain support, right? So not having any of that is probably just throws you off, and you're like, okay, how do I figure this out now?
Oh yeah, and then you have the problem of, so even if you can support it, right, and you do get there to support it, what's the reliability of this, right? Particularly if you're delivering transactions on behalf of users. It's really bad if like you take money, or like you escrow money, or your protocol takes money and you can't deliver it on the other end because there's literally one public RPC and it's down, right? And this was like, it's not even that complex. This was like really a lot of the early problem, right? With this, one of the kind of what some people will say interesting strategy decisions here as well from them was so the Hyper EVM like node and like client is still to date closed source. It's closed sourced, kind of a bit of a black box. They did eventually, I don't know if they did it on launch. So, I'm gonna say some stuff here, and like, if I don't know for sure, you're gonna have some Hyperliquid guy like come scream at me. I don't know, but like, I don't think you could run a node on day one. I think it took them a little bit to like release these, you have to release all the stuff with it. And even today, when you run a node, the chain's really fast. There's a lot of backed state already in it. Like the dark secret of like this block explorer that we ran, right, was, and it's not even a secret, it's on GitHub. A lot of people who sync the Hyperliquid chain today just copy a bunch of blocks from an S3 bucket that the team runs. There's no, there's no connecting to peers and validating blocks in the chain along the way. We're all just kind of like trading a big copy of a blockchain block back and forth between each other. And that's how we're syncing the first 2.2 million blocks to get to like current state, right? And like, as long as nobody screws up, I think that's like okay, right? Because like in the long run, you can validate that. It's kind of like, do you need to do it today? I mean, it'd be nice to, right? But the infrastructure is just, and it's starting to slowly get better.
I mean, honestly, it sounds like free markets just doing their thing. So it's actually genius from their end, because there is a natural incentives for builders, because there is liquidity and users want to use that chain, right? So you as a builder will figure out these problems, and which you actually did. So it's
This is what I ultimately like figure out. It's like you're like confused for a bit. You're like a lost dog, like running around. You're like, I don't know what's going on, and you're like, oh, I see what happened here. Well, I mean, what do you mean? I woke up one day, I looked up, I go, why am I running the goddamn like mainnet block? How did I get in this? Who airdropped me this obligation? Like what? Right? I was like, I walked right into the trap. I mean, it did exactly right. Yeah, because there was demand. I mean, like right out the gate, people were like HyperEVM, right? I was like, okay, I got to do something, right?
So yeah, this is so interesting, because like we live in a time where all of us talk about how if you're launching a chain, you need to have interop figured out, right? Like you need to have your canonical provider, you need to have your assets issued on one of the token standards, you need liquidity bridges on day one, relays, everything should be sorted. And the good thing is it's actually happening. Like Better Chain was a better launch. All the new chains, I think like they've been much, much better, at least the hot ones. But then on the other side of the spectrum, we have HyperEVM, which did none of this, but somehow all the tooling is still there eventually.
Because they have the benefit and privilege of having essentially invented I don't even know what the market cap of Hype is today. Do we know? Is it 30 billion? Is it higher? I don't even know. Like they poofed, right? And like this money is on Hypercore for the most part, right? The online, it's like it's there. Some one third, whatever of it. So they have the privilege of, and this is why I think this is why TVL, right? Like they have that edge. They have the edge of, hey, we put a lot of money on this chain Hypercore, right? And with Hyper EVM parallel to it, whereas sure you can bridge it off and go to Arbitrum. You want to go to Arbitrum? Like they're like, nah, I'm gonna go to Hyper EVM, right? Like, so like yeah, like it would. I mean, it's one of these things that I don't know. It's a very unique and different strategy to approaching just about everything.
Yeah.
And I think it might only work for them. I would be very like even a really well funded and good one, right? Like thinking like, do you think this works for Sonic? Like, no, like I really don't. No, I think it's like name one other chain you think could just go out there and be like, it reminds me of a Bitcoin Talk.org chain launch from like 2017. These guys would just like release like a binary for a wallet and like the Genesis block and like some boot nodes and be like, have fun, guys. Like that's kind of what they did, and like nobody else can do that. And
it's almost like if they failed, we would be sitting here and talking about, okay, they didn't do any of the work, so it's not a surprise if they failed, right? But then it worked out for them, and it actually says a lot about like crypto in particular. You can only do this in crypto. You've airdropped a crazy amount of money to users. You've basically had their loyalty for a long, long time in crypto now, and then they're willing to do anything and everything for this ecosystem at this point.
And I mean, yeah, and like. Sure, that's what I think a lot of that is too, right? The outlier catch of that is I'm not even one of the, I have an entirely different incentive, right?
That's the infrastructure
and like,
builder
even stronger. Yeah, right. Like they didn't even airdrop me like $3 million or whatever some people got, and yet I'm still as arguably because everyone that they did is demanding this as support in a product, right? So if you want to build a good product, you want to build what people want. Okay, like we gotta go figure out Hyper EVM today, guys. Like, let's go.
Honestly, like this is a case study. Howard should probably study it at some point. But then coming back to the topic, right? So Hyper EVM is live today. There's much better tooling today than there was 6 months ago. And then I'm starting to see more and more airdrop threads come up on Twitter. Like earlier, it was just tweets ending with the Hyperliquid. Now there are proper guides, Twitter threads, right? So are you seeing more activity? Yeah. Right, so that's the trick. But are you seeing more activity from smaller users rotating money or transferring money to Hyperliquid now? Hyper EVM.
Oh yeah, for sure. And like even like size comparatively for us, right? Because there's just not a lot of good venues outside of going through Hyperliquid itself, in order to do that. But like, so what is interesting is one, I mean, I checked maybe 2 weeks ago, the amount of like, total unique wallets on the chain and like weekly/daily active unique wallets on the chain is like a couple magnitudes less of like some chain you would think is like shouldn't have anybody on it. Like, what are you doing over there? So like, it's still very under. It's still very under like explored to some extent from that regard, right? But it's picked up significantly, I think, and it feels like one of the few. It's like 3 or 4 chains, maybe 5. For lack of a better term, like the ecosystem is like clearly real.
There's like
And it's like
real
it
builders,
sounds
real
like a low
users.
bar,
Yeah.
but yeah, you go to a bunch of these chains, right? And you're just like immediately you're like this is fake. You're like living in like the Truman Show or something. You're like this isn't real. And like I don't even know if the team knows that they're not real, right? Like they think they have like an ecosystem of 300,000 Twitter followers, and it's like 30 guys with like Claude Pro accounts just like heaven banning them on Twitter, telling them how great they are like forever. And like there is no ecosystem. There's actually real people here, right? So it's definitely been one of the more and like actually organic and real ecos for
Do
sure.
you feel that from a builder perspective as well? Because I was checking one of the dashboards about the applications on HyperEVM, right? So there are 120 apps in the HyperEVM ecosystem at this point, and a lot of them were native apps. So that means these are just available on HyperEVM, built specifically for this user base, right? So do you feel that in the developer community that these are a new breed of developers somehow?
Yeah, I don't know if they're a new. I mean, I think a lot of these people are like guys that came from EVM stuff, right? Like I don't know how many like raw new developers they brought. Maybe I'm sure, probably I don't know. But most of these guys, I think at least I've seen, are like EVM guys. But I think if you're going to do it, like very rarely does it make sense to do it in a way like we do it because we support 300 chains. We're not in anyone's like chain ballpark. But if you're going to go build like a lending, like you're building a lending thing or you're building a whatever, right? There's billions of dollars of TVL to go over there and fight for right now for your application, right? Like people kill for the opportunity to be somewhere where there's essentially dormant TVL looking for something to do. And that's essentially what's not only there right now with the high TVL. Like there's a lot more on Hypercore, right, that can come over in a single click. So I think if you're going to build one of these things, you kind of have this conversation internally, and you're like, well, should we really like keep building on scroll? Like, no, probably not, right? Like, so I think you just go all in on it, right? And I think you get obviously, there's social and ecosystem and all the kind of soft benefits of when you are a Hyperliquid native project, right, versus not.
Okay. And then another thing that I noticed was some bridges support Hypercore while the others support HyperEVM. Like, do you know why that's the case? Like, I could not make sense of it. It just seems like a random guess, not a random guess, but like every team figuring out for themselves, okay, this is more valuable at this point than the other one.
No, well, so Hypercore came first, right? So a lot of these people, the infrastructure of Hypercore has been out there. But Hypercore isn't infrastructure like an EVM, right? Hypercore, essentially mainnet and testnet, is a single API, I believe that the team, posts out, and there's no like transactions. There's no like I mean, there's like a network. I don't really know but like there's signature transactions, right? And it like immediate, right? So it's like doing a transaction is like signing a message and like pinging it off to an API, right? Whereas HyperEVM is you're interfacing with an EVM chain. So you have all the stuff that comes along with that. You have transaction balances, you have RPCs, you have it's the functional EVM chain. Where the other one is like kind of like a black box, and we're just like, I mean, actually it's closed source, right? Like it's just shoot this signed message into this endpoint, and guess what? Your money moves. You're like, all right, same, right? So I don't know. I would like to say maybe Hypercore is from a developer POV was maybe. It's definitely not easier to like build things on. I don't think. I don't even know how you would start if you like wanted to do that.
If you think about it, do you think Hypercore is more suited for an intent-based bridge because the relayer or the solver is kind of fronting money on that chain, right? So you can't really bootstrap pools on that chain.
Yeah, and like, I mean, I think the whole reason why they built HyperEVM, right? It was like because so HyperEVM can like interact with Hypercore, right? So you can do all the stuff on HyperEVM and have it like essentially like execute and compile over on Hypercore, right? And that's like the benefit of it. And like the long term, I think what is like the real selling prop if this all works is like you have like a parallel EVM execution like environment that runs along this like stupidly highly performant, decentralized, chain that is Hypercore. And so Hypercore can do everything it needs to do in order to essentially innovate in whatever their own sense is of that, right? Without kind of being strung to the crux of like what an EVM chain is. but then you can have the EVM chain and get all the kind of traditional benefits and native compatibility that you would with the rest of the world with it. And I don't know, like, when it comes to a bridge with Hypercore, I mean, like functionally Hyperliquid is the best bridge on Hypercore. Right? Because it's just like, what's the difference? Like, you can also just go to the exchange and deposit your money in.
I mean, that's what users are doing. Like, I was going through some of the guides, and it's still the same process for the users. Like, they're going to Arbitrum, depositing on Hypercore, and then even to use Hyper EVM, they're actually doing the same process and then withdrawing on Hyper EVM or like transferring to Hyper EVM.
Yep. Yeah. You bridge natively between Hypercore and Hyper EVM by sending your money to, I think they call it the Oracle address, but it's a 0x22222222 forever. It's kind of feels like you're burning your money. But then you go and open up the other way and you're like, oh, it showed up. Like, hell yeah.
That's how bridging worked 3 years ago.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, it's like actually not that, like, sure, there's like some merit. I think why we supported it ultimately was, I was like, and there's probably some people out there that like, I can cut out a couple steps of this. They have Solana. They want 10 Sol and they want it over in Hype, right? Like a bridge can facilitate that process and cut out like 4 or 5 steps, right? If you're ever doing real money, like the best way for sure is still to go in natively and buy Hype on the exchange natively, the most liquid deep book on it, and then bridge it out to HyperEVM if you want yourself, right? And like this isn't like a prohibitive experience. It's like quite trivial to do if you can use an exchange more or less.
I mean, and then at this point there are stable coins on Hyperliquid. Like I think USDT0 added support recently, so that ecosystem is fairly active. And then there's more and more stable coins coming, more and more assets coming. I know Fartcoin was listed recently, so they have meme coins as well.
My theory here is I don't know how desirable stable coins are on the Hyper EVM. I don't know how much that user base is looking to stable up on the Hyper EVM. I'm over there. Last thing I'm thinking about is like, how do I get a stable value of my account balance right now?
They're trying to figure out what's the yield. No, nobody's doing that.
No, everyone's trying to figure out like, how do I like 50x my Hype balance here? Because like I think Hype is going to $5 bajillion and like yeah. Nobody's there, so I don't know what's going to happen with those stables, but it's good, like merit-wise from the POV.
Have you explored the ecosystem as a user?
Yeah, a bit. Primarily because like I kind of watch sometimes when I joke that I like read chains. I literally read the fucking chains of these things that we bridge to. So I'll follow users and kind of see what they do, right? And there's a couple, I think unique and native things to Hyper EVM that are out there today. Kind of stuff that interacts and facilitates with Hypercore, and people building towards stuff. The stuff that's natively on the EVM right now, it's not like bad, right? I mean, it's going to sound bad, but it's the stuff that you would traditionally kind of expect on an EVM network right now, right? And it's all still relatively early and somewhat, right? I mean, some guys launched hyperrpc.com, which is like a service. This just launched maybe a month ago. QuickNode just finally supported mainnet maybe 2 weeks ago. Prior to that, there was no infra. It was like you had to run your own node if you wanted to do this thing, and that's a whole it's a whole task in and of itself. So it's like still early and understandably so, right? But most of the stuff we've seen over there, native EVM wise at least, but like it's not dead, right? Like go to like one of these like launcher pump fund clones on like pick a chain off the Gas.Zip list, right? Like it's just like the last trade will be 7 days ago. Whereas here, like, these things like, the coin launchers, even the like the lending protocols, the looping, all this stuff, like it has people have interest in it, right? I think they have interest in it because they feel like, and rightfully so, they feel like they're early to something. And like they were like compensated, they believed in this thing early on, right? That's what I think the core user base is right now. People that were Hyperliquid traders and believers were heavily rewarded for that. And now they're like, hell yeah, I know what an EVM chain is. I can go do all these games. I can go do all these things. And like, yep, cool. Here's like 1/4 of my Hype stack. I'm going to bridge it over and I'm going to shove it into all these apps and like support all the teams that are trying to do this stuff, right? And that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know how you ever replicate this if you want to, because it was just like from the infrastructure to this to the people going and do it. Like it's. I think there's a lot of chain teams that would be envious of how the development is going, right, to some extent. But at the same time, like I'm also like not envious because it's like it kind of feels like it's a rough battle, right? Like it's a rough battle they're fighting over there.
Honestly, like at this point, I would take an ecosystem that's unique in its own way, right? Like
Oh, absolutely.
People cry about Solana being a casino. People are just trading meme coins. But then, if you look at the order books, for example, for some of these meme coins and compare Solana to Base, you can see life in the order books on Solana, and then like there's one
Sure.
order every 10 minutes on the Base side. So if HyperEVM has active traders, active users, and they have like a specific interest, it's honestly a good thing because you can then build unique apps just for these users, and you know that they would like it. There will be users, so it's a good thing.
I think it's kind of particularly like exactly what's happening right now, right? And like I kind of think that maybe this is actually just the map. Like this is the plan, right? Like there's a chance that like as however chaotic this may look from like the outside of an ecosystem, right? That like they're like sitting behind their desk somewhere and they're just like everything's going according to plan, right? And like that like might be true. So you know, and it's rough around the edges. Like everything there is rough around the edges. Like building on it, getting over there, right? I mean, as you use Hyperliquid, right? But it's not comparable in a lot of those regards to what you would traditionally be used to with like a new L2 launch, right? I mean, it's bad, but it's different and it's under supported, in that regard. But surely, if hype doesn't go to zero, like the stuff gets like this. It's not like these are impossible problems to solve, right? Maybe it is if this thing remains a closed source black box forever. Maybe there are some problems that are impossible for us to solve, but we'll
What do
see.
you think is the bull case for Hyper EVM? Like, do you think this can actually someday compete? I won't even say compete. Like, it can actually replicate what BNB chain did at some point, what Solana did in the last cycle. Do you think in the next cycle, Hyper EVM can be one of those chains that magically just becomes one of the go-to chains of the ecosystem?
Well, when you say can it be like the BNB, you're talking about price, I imagine,
So
and
it's
market
actually
capitalization.
both because like sure in terms of price BNB the asset is up there, but then even from an ecosystem perspective, like Binance has a cabal in a way. Like they have their own users,
Sure.
people trust them, people just trade the assets that are listed on Binance on PancakeSwap. So there's like this loyalty again, right? So I feel like HyperEVM has some of those characteristics.
Okay, as long as you're not trying to convince me that Binance Chain was useful. Okay, But I mean, the bull case here, right, is essentially that Hyperliquid and Hypercore becomes the perpetual, futures exchange of the world, right? And Hyper EVM becomes the interface for that. Hyper EVM, you can think of Hyper EVM kind of bootstrapping the Binance cabal that exists around Binance, the company, and the chain itself, right? You won't need to like go like swindle whoever the listing person is and then like talk to them and you get in a telegram for 3 weeks and this and that, right? Like it's like no, like oh, you want to like list something? There's like a process and a procedure right here. You can bid on this thing, you can do this thing, you can do whatever, you can launch spot coin, you want a futures thing, you go through this process. Be like protocolizing to some extent the interface of what is like a really successful futures exchange, right? And I think that's like what the bull case for it is, right? And it's a lot easier to build on Hyper EVM with a lot of infrastructure and et cetera than say Hypercore natively, right? And like I would imagine this is kind of like the grand thought to pitch to some extent, right? Just like you have Binance, the best perpetual futures exchange in the world. Exactly what you said. There's a cabal around it, from the chain to the people to the team to all this stuff. What if you just like removed all of them and instead
Build your own
they are
cabal.
like interfaces on a chain? Yeah, but it's like the cabal is like a bunch of contracts on an EVM chain, right? And like it's open to kind of anybody. It's open to anybody, probably presuming you have the resources to accomplish what you want to accomplish, particularly funding and stuff, right? Doesn't mean everything's gonna be free, but I that's what like the listings thing I think is like a way I try to explain it to people is like at least the way I like think of it, right? Is like just like take everybody at Binance that's on like the team that works at listings, probably 300, 200 people, right? Fire them all and be like, hey, okay, there's like this like auction now, and people can just like pay and bid, and like if you win the auction, like you get listed. GG, good luck. And like, hey, if you want like a spot like issuance over here on like this like spot exchange, like cool, you can just like do it. Like protocolize that process, right, and kind of make it transparent and fair. And
It's
you
almost
can
like they
look
have
at.
the hindsight benefit, right? Like 5 years later, if you were to build Binance with more of crypto's ethos, how would you do it? So that's the Hyperliquid
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, and like, does it work? Like, I mean, I don't know because honestly, I don't even know like how an exchange works. I don't know what that cabal entails, right? Like, I really don't. But in theory, I think it's like, I mean, it's definitely worth more of a shot than the vast majority of shit people are doing out here, right?
I mean,
And like, it makes sense in theory, right? And that's ultimately what I think the desired end state of like, why would you launch this parallel EVM chain? along with Hypercore.
I guess there's liquidity, there's users now, and there's like definite interest, right? So builders are also coming. So there's literally nothing more you can ask for. So I think a year down the line, it'll be interesting to see how HyperEVM actually pans out. It would also depend on where we are in the market. But I feel like this would answer some of the questions people would have but never would have gotten an answer for it in a way. And hopefully like people enjoyed this conversation learning from your experiences, because you've, as I said earlier, like intimately known
Yeah,
the
I don't
blockchain.
even have that many. Like, if you like listen to this and you're like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and like high scan per tur, whatever. This project did whatever. Like, yeah, I know, right? I wasn't deep and early in Hyperliquid. I wanted to support the EVM chain in a way. I wanted to support every other EVM chain, and that resulted in us probably spending, I don't know, collectively 4 or 5 days of our lives like poking at this chain and being like, what happens if I do that? And what happens if I do that? And for what it's worth, if you're building, there are a bunch of, again, this is an undocumented Geth fork. I think it's a Geth fork, right? It's an undocumented, highly customized and modded and et cetera black box Geth fork. And for the most part, it'll behave as you expect it. You start doing anything extreme and super custom, you might start getting some unexpected behaviors back in return, right? And you go and ask, and there's for what I found like 2 guys in the entire internet that know anything about like the EVM, and they know it super well. I was super impressed. I don't know how they did that. They must have spent weeks of their life like figuring this stuff out, right? And they run the archive nodes and they build custom implementations and all this stuff. There's a couple people out there who are really, really good and really understand it. But yeah, there's a lot of rough edges. I would say, and actually this is probably, we didn't talk on this, but this is like the only thing you go and talk to particularly a bunch of infra providers today. You've probably experienced this at Li.F when you want to talk to people. And I've talked to just people, RPC companies, infra companies, indexers. And they're all kind of like, they're not mad, they're not pissed, but they're a bit like confused and ruffled. And they're like, hey, we like kind of wanted to support this thing. And part of it is because like I think some of these guys are like stuck in like the bureaucratic, like old, like we have like prestige and like we expect
Nobody
that,
came
like,
and talked to us.
yeah, right. And but they all kind of have this kind of like edge of, well, we like talk to Hyperliquid and like, what they tell you is like, well, we like talk to them and they were like not very interested in helping us, blah, 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 right? And like, is that true? Probably. And like, but also, is it true in the regard that like, were you just like, hey, I want to build something and like I have a question? Like, no, probably not. You probably went and were like, hi, like sign my weird like SLA for like a 3-year term and I'll be your exclusive block because like you think you're this, So I don't really know, but if you go and talk to these people, like infra providers, they won't necessarily say bad things, but they won't give you necessarily a raving review of like, and they don't support it. And they're like, listen, it's expensive to run. There's high costs. And when I have problems, nobody's there to help me. And it's kind of a valid complaint, right? And that's kind of the nature of this alpha stage launch, right? But the flip side of this, and why I think maybe it's a bit more personalized to them to some, I don't know. I've not had that experience. Granted, I'm not doing anything crazy, right? But anytime I've like wanted to learn something or I had a question or do whatever, like, I just you go into the ecosystem chat or one of these places, you ping one of the guy, right?
But then that's a degen builder way to do it, right? So you're on the one hand you're talking about like proper MNC companies. They're like they don't want to get into the discords. They don't want to get into the dark alleys of Interop.
Yeah, but that's like, is that not what they? I guess not. What, they like send a cold email and they're like, why hasn't so and so responded to me? I'm like, oh, what do you mean? I go like find these guys and like talk, right? So all I'm saying is, yeah, if you like ask around, you're gonna find some people that are gonna say, I wanted to support Hyperliquid. I wanted to use it. I wanted to build it into my thing. These guys didn't help me. These guys didn't put any infra out, and like I'm dead in the water. So what do you want me to do about it? I don't think that's necessarily the case for everybody. Did they not put any infra out? Yes, absolutely. Is it really hard to use to some extent? Yes, absolutely. Anytime I've had a question or a problem, gone to these guys have been more than happy to help. So I think there's
it just comes back to the community, I guess. Like if you're willing to put in the time, somebody from the Hyperliquid community is probably there to help you out.
Yeah, that and like I like made like a shit. I'm like a troll right on Twitter. So I made like a shit. It was a bit of a shit post, but I was actually tilted when we ran into one of these weird edge cases on the EVM, and I was tilted. And I put out some like shit post, right? And like some of the Hyperliquid guys were like, oh come on, they're like I don't think this is really fair. It's like right, and like they didn't get mad, right? And they like discussed it very rationally and like politely with me, right? But I could tell they weren't like, I'm going to invite you to my barbecue this weekend, right? They weren't really happy with Tom Geiser. But then, time goes on and like, suddenly I build some other things, right? I have a question, they ask them and they like respond. Cause like, oh, like actually, like kid's like probably not like an asshole, and like they're actually trying to use our stuff like legitimately, and like they're not trying to get me to sign some weird like RPC infra SLA or whatever, right? Like, okay, yeah, what do you need help
As
with?
long as you
So,
end your tweets with Hyperliquid, it's all good.
hyper gas, but yes, you know,
Awesome.
ultimately, I think that yeah, that Hyperliquid meme was again, yeah, you need someone to like outside of you can't replicate it for all the technical things we just talked about there again. Even just that, how do you replicate that? How do you get the entire ecosystem to keep ending your tweets with Hyperliquid? Like, it's unreplicatable, and that was before they got rich. I mean, actually, maybe
It was at the same
it
time.
was around. Yes, that was sure, but like, still, yeah, I don't know. I would be interested. We should do this again in 6 months.
I mean, this is a good time to do it because I feel like it's just about to pop off. So 6 months from
Yeah.
now, we might be having a very different conversation. But
Yes.
like that's the best thing about talking with you. I feel like you have certain stories from the interop circles that nobody else has probably put their hands into. So you run into all of these problems, but then you have all of these stories to share. So thanks a lot for your time, and hopefully
course.
it'll be helpful for the users and the builders out there.
Absolutely. And if anyone's listening, you think I can be helped, please, again, or I will point you to one of those two guys that I know that now know everything about the EVM. So, you know, if you be helpful, please, like, you know, these guys have actually been quite great to us in the ecosystem. So, you know, do I want to run your Explorer? No, not anymore. I'm like not that competent. Will I point you and help you out? Yeah, by all means, shoot me a message, you know? So
Just one thing to say: Hyperliquid.
Hyperliquid. Hyperliquid.